to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today we enter into 1 Samuel 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time that they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shearers, and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword." And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master." And he railed at them. "Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this, and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him." And Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared, and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on the donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me, behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as Yahweh lives, and as your soul lives, because Yahweh has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for Yahweh will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of Yahweh, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of Yahweh your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when Yahweh has done to my lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my lord working salvation himself. And when Yahweh has dealt well with my lord, then remember your servant." David said to Abigail, Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as Yahweh, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left in Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later Yahweh struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be Yahweh, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. Yahweh has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife. And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal his daughter David's wife to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim. This is the word of the Lord. So we jump into this text here today, and we have really just a singular account of an event in the life of King David before he is treated as king by the people. He has been working to care for really the things of Nabal without Nabal even knowing it. He's been caring for the men. He's been helping to provide and make sure that they were well cared for, that all the possessions of Nabal, his sheep, etc., that things were going well with them. Now, Maon, we've talked about before. Its location being out south of Jerusalem, a little lower than about a third of the way down the Dead Sea, from a third of the way up from the bottom of the Dead Sea, I should say, out to the west. Carmel is going to be a neighboring city there. And so we meet this rich man, Nabal. His own wife is later going to call him basically a fool. That's what Nabal means. She's going to say that his name is fitting for him. As his name is, so is he, in verse 25. We see an immediate contrast set up between Nabal and Abigail in verse 3. She is discerning, which is actually a wonderful compliment. Discerning means that you're wise. It means you can tell right from wrong, good from evil. As we think of being the Christian church today, we are called to be able to discern truth from lies, to be able to know what is God's word and what isn't. This is a wonderful thing, and it's a hard place to get to have the wisdom to rightly discern. Is really more precious than beauty, which is the other attribute lifted up here, as that she is discerning and beautiful. And that's then contrasted with her husband, who is harsh. So he deals terribly with people. He's mean to them, cold in his care for those he's been given to care for, and he's badly behaved. Drunkenness is about all we'll see come up in the text, so we can't say a whole lot more than that. He was a Calebite, so a descendant of Caleb, one of the men of God's people. David is asking for food for their journey. Not the first time he's done this. He did this with Ahimelech and Nob, the priest, back in chapter 21. That led to the destruction of a priest. And this almost led to the destruction of Nabal's family. So you're getting to the point where you really don't want David asking you for food. You give it to him and you're in trouble. You don't give it to him and you're in trouble. Now, context is important, but it's a little more of a joke here, a little humor. When you get to the next paragraph in verse 9, in that section, really Nabal's response is to label David a rebel, essentially. David has rebelled against his master. He's fled from Saul. Why should I help David? Why should I help the one who's run away? So Nabal is going to lump himself in with Saul instead. David doesn't take well to Nabal rejecting to care for his servants as David had been caring for Nabal's servants. So David, as he's going to say later on in the text, repaying the evil of Nabal upon himself, David's taking it into his own hands here at first. And that's the paragraph we get in 14. Beginning. It was still the same paragraph. It's verse 13. David gets his men ready to fight. And we see David's rash vow of his own down in verse 22 as David is preparing to cause harm to all the house of Nabal. It's a rashness he learned maybe from Saul back in chapter 14, verse 14, or from Jonathan in chapter 20, verse 13. He's seeing and using the same kind of language that they used. Even Eli did this in chapter 3, verse 17, when he was speaking to the boy Samuel at the time. So this idea of a rash vow coming up again and again throughout the book. Now, Abigail is told the account of what happened with her husband Nabal and the servants of David, and just as David said in verse 8 that they would speak well if Nabal would just ask, well, they speak well to Abigail, and Abigail listens. And that's the result in verse 17. The servants have skipped over speaking to their master. They have skipped over speaking to Nabal, the rich man who owns the house and is in control of them, and they've gone instead to his wife, who doesn't have the authority of the household. But they're going to her because Nabal is in a sense, lost it. He's out of touch with everything going on, and there's violence about to come in their house. They're all going to die because he's being this wicked man. And so they plead to Abigail, and Abigail acts. She decides to help as best she can. As we continue down, we see some humility from Abigail. When she finally meets David, she gets down on the ground. She bows to the ground. There's a pleading for her family and for her home. She even takes the guilt. Verse 24, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Who can we make a parallel to there? That's a question for your children. Who takes the guilt? Who takes away all of the guilt? That's pointing us to Jesus. Abigail is willing to take on herself the guilt of her husband, the guilt of her household. That, again, speaks very well and highly of her. It's quite a speech she makes, taking the blame again for allowing David's men to really even meet Nabal, basically, and then prays for all kinds of blessings upon him, including forgiveness. Another thing to bring up with your children, when somebody asks you for forgiveness, what do you say or what do you do? And the answer is we forgive them. That's what the Lord gives us to do. It's interesting in verse 29, she talks about David's enemies being slung out like from the hollow of a sling. Her family is in the sheep business, so the sling is a common tool, just as it was for David. But it's just worth noting because of the role that the sling has played in the book of Samuel, as David used it to kill Goliath. That's showing up here. David relents in the paragraph starting at verse 32. He turns back from the harm he was going to cause to them. And by the next morning, Nabal is essentially dead. After he learns of what's transpired, he learns of Abigail meeting with David and that David was probably about to kill him. Basically, he loses the will to live. It goes out of him. He's described as becoming like stone in the text. And then the next day, 10 days later, Yahweh strikes him down. That's God's judgment coming upon him again, as we've talked about God's judgment previously in the book. Now we have here in verse 39, David saying, Yahweh has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. The Bible teaches this way, not just about judgment, as we've discussed, but also about the idea of vengeance. Vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to us. David noted this in 24:12 as he was speaking to Saul, that he could have killed Saul, but he did not. He wouldn't harm the Lord's anointed, but instead prayed that the Lord would take his vengeance for him. And then also Romans 12:19 in the New Testament talks about this. It's actually quoting the Old, but the idea that the vengeance belongs to the Lord. The Lord will repay. It's important for us to consider. Then David takes Abigail in the text as his wife, so his second bride, and in verse 43 he takes a third bride with Ahinoam. Polygamy common in the Old Testament. probably will come up in our culture as we are moving forward here. It seems more and more likely that conversation will be open. We're already opening to that idea of open marriage. So this may be coming, and as Christians, we need to have a deeper conversation about it and not flee from it. Old Testament has it quite frequently. It never condemns it, but every time it happens, it's always a bad thing. And then suddenly in the New Testament, it's gone. So it's worth talking to your pastor. They're equipped, they're prepared to have the conversation about it so that you can have that conversation with your family and your children. Abigail doesn't even seem to need to grieve over the death of her husband. Just an interesting note with verse 41 and 42. And then lastly, Saul takes his daughter Michal, who is already the wife of David, and he gives her to another man. So not a good thing to do by any stretch, any means. That's our text for the day. Chapter 26. Tomorrow we see David with Saul again.